Welcome to this micro course on implementing a really fun concept called Breadcrumb Pathfinding. So what is Breadcrumb Pathfinding? It's a system that's often used to guide the player by drawing a path to a particular objective. And you can see examples of this in games such as Dead Space, or when you're driving the Batmobile in Batman Arkham Knight. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to do is draw a path that the player can see, that they can visualize. So in Godot, how we do this is we want to first create a CSG polygon 3D, which is a type of procedural mesh. By default, this comes in as a cube, and the pivot is on this corner down here, which is not what we want. We want the pivot to be basically in the center of the mesh, or rather we want the mesh to be centered around the pivot. And you can also see how this works by sliding this depth slider here. So we don't actually set, say, 8 vertices, we only need to set 4. In our case, we also want it to be quite small. So how we do this is you can unfold this packed vector to array, and we're going to change these values. And I've already played with these values ahead of time to basically get an idea of what we might want. And so what we'll do is we'll put -0.1, -0.001, and then another -0.1, and in this case it'll be 0.001. And then we want 0.1, 0.001, and then 0.1, -0.001, which is kind of hard to see in this case, but when we actually add our path, it won't be too bad. Another thing that I also like to do is, I'm going to reset that, is I like to check this smooth faces, and that will basically smooth out the normals, if I'm understanding that correctly, and it'll just make this path look a little bit nicer when it renders. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add a path to follow. So let's go ahead and add a path 3D. And we can expand this curve here, and we can add some elements to it. We can just do 0, 0, 0 for the first one. And sometimes it's nice to actually just edit some of these by hand, just to make sure that you can select them quite easily. And now the next thing that you'll want to do is go to this CSG polygon 3D, and we want to change the mode from depth to path, and then we want to assign this path as our path node. And so now, as you can see, actually let me pull this whole path up a bit, maybe over. We'll actually ultimately probably want this, the actual path node, to be zeroed out in the transform, but for now, just to visualize, we'll go ahead and do this. So now if I add another element, let's put negative 2. And what you'll see is that this path is actually being used to extrude the geometry for this CSG polygon 3D. And that is step 1 to getting our Breadcrumb pathfinding up and running.